Hello everybody, I'm KC and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. Today we're continuing the 5-year anniversary of Let's Talk About by counting down my top 10 favorite movies. This is the second part of a countdown for my top 20 favorite movies, so if you haven't seen that yet and you're curious about what those movies were, you can check out part 1 at the link up above. For those of you all caught up, let's get right back into this list with...
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 10. The Avengers. Full disclosure, this was originally going to be under the top 10, but thanks to my To Infinity War and Beyond reviews, I have invested so much time and energy into the cinematic universe in the last couple of years that's become a bigger part of my life, and therefore, the catalyst for my investment ranks higher in my favorite movies. Now, most of you know I started my journey with the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the Iron Man movies, and the only reason I even watched this movie in the first place was because Iron Man was in it. But while Iron Man was my first step into the MCU, and is a great movie itself, The Avengers has remained my favorite of these movies because it's what completely invested me in the franchise. In a way, I feel like we take for granted these days just how innovative this first team-up was. Unless you're in the horror game, it's rare to see characters from separate films cross over like this, even if they're in the same genre or even with the same studio. Never mind combining 4 separate franchises to build up to this now legendary event of a film. The first Avengers movie was special because you get a good sense of who everyone was and what their characters were like without having to be familiar with their previous appearances, which I wasn't, and this movie really had my attention in the second act where there's barely any action, and it's mostly dedicated to just having the heroes get to know each other in both a friendly and confrontational way. Nothing highlights how perfectly the Marvel movies are cast like putting all these performers together and watching them work off each other, whether it's bouncing around with banter or confronting ideologies or bonding over mutual goals and rising up to the greater challenge this movie presents. Not to mention the action is exciting with battles between our heroes and together in one of Marvel's best climaxes to this day. The production design is distinct and memorable for me, and it turned out to be just the beginning of a much larger universe. I think that's why my experience with the Avengers remains so special to me, because it unknowingly opened up a whole new world for me. Unlike something like my everlasting hesitation to get into franchises like Star Wars and X-Men, I didn't go into this with the daunting task of keeping up with a major film franchise, but instead had a pure curiosity to follow a single character. With everything presented so well, it made me crave seeing more. A desire I didn't have before going in, not knowing there was such an interconnected universe underneath waiting to be explored. It felt like discovering something new and special and wanting to be a part of the journey. There's a reason the MCU basically changed Hollywood after this, and now everyone wants a cinematic universe, because they pulled off such a radical idea for the big screen so expertly that it almost felt easy, with all the pieces fitting together so well thanks to how good what came before was, and being so strong and successful that it would jumpstart something that would become even more massive. It's the MCU movie I've seen the most, and no matter how many times Earth's mightiest heroes assemble, the forming of the Avengers will always be the most meaningful for me.
Because if we can't protect the Earth, you can be damn well sure we'll avenge it.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 9. Pokemon, Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. Even though I have made it no secret what a Pokemaniac I am, some of you might still be surprised that a Pokemon movie made it on the list, or at least this high, since Pokemon movies aren't really known for being, at least objectively, good. But a favorite movies list is the most subjective kind out there, so due to my 20 plus years of unconditional devotion to this franchise, it really shouldn't come to the shock that one of them made the list. Then you might be surprised that it's not one from the nostalgic trilogy, but the 8th movie. But Lucario and the Mystery of Mew really stuck with me after I finished it in a way that no Pokemon movie has managed to since. Despite still taking place in the grand creative world of Pokemon, it's very down to earth and surprisingly emotional. The biggest draw is definitely the featured Pokemon this time, Lucario, the first non-legendary Pokemon to get his own movie. But that makes sense because, I mean, just look at him. This Pokemon was born to be a star, influencing the entire direction of the movie. With the Kingdom of Cameron giving this cool look to Pokemon's ancient past that makes a fan like me squee, a gorgeous location and magical part of this world that envelops the entire film. And Lucario's unique power of aura serves as an essential piece of not just the kingdom, but the movie, which is impressive for a non-legendary and gives the audience a chance to see what makes Lucario special. It's a bit of a refreshing film compared to the previous ones up to that point, since the big quest in the movie is for the gang to go find Pikachu after Mew ran off with him, accompanied by Lucario. But as we've seen, and we will continue to see, I really like these kind of movies where you get to just slow down, let the characters breathe, and really get to know them as if they were people. So to see that approach to a story in my childhood franchise was neat. And Lucario's backstory and inner struggles are the emotional core of the movie. Not since Mewtwo had I seen a Pokemon put through such tragedy and having to learn that humans are worth giving a chance. As much as I love Mewtwo, I always connected with Lucario a bit more, because his betrayal was so much more personal. And between being a mon out of time and believing he was abandoned by his friend and mentor is really compelling, at least by Pokemon standards. I did a full review on this movie a really long time ago, so I know I could go on for a while about this one. There's just something about the connections and relationships in this movie and the challenges presented to those forming and long-lasting friendships that really makes this one stand out to me. I got so connected to Lucario during this journey that, spoilers, his death made me cry at a Pokemon movie at age 13 and would get the tears rolling subsequently until I hit my 20s. And I don't care how that sounds, how sad it is, I do not care. Any movie that can do that deserves a good mark. The test of a movie's impact for me is the emotional journey it took me on and if I felt what it wanted me to sincerely. Lucario and the Mystery of Mew, believe it or not, accomplished that more than any Pokemon movie before or since. It was the emotional peak of my childhood love for Pokemon, and it's filled with several story devices that I would grow to love in my adulthood. It's still my favorite Pokemon movie even a dozen movies later, and it likely always will be.
The aura is with me!
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 8.
Screens.
Back to the Future. You know, I just realized this is the third Robert Zemeckis movie on this list. What can I say? The 80s and 90s were the man's golden age, and Back to the Future might have been the purest gold of them all. Man, where do you even begin with this one? It's one of those movies that I think is on most people's favorite movies lists. I've hardly ever seen someone say a bad thing about it. Do you know how rare that is for a genre film on the internet? Back to the Future is one of those movies that takes a tried and true premise, time travel, and uses it to tell a highly engaging and original story. While I am certainly willing to bet that the going back in time to make sure your parents get together plot had been done before, this movie is the definitive version of this story and would lead to everybody wanting to do their version of it. It's one of the most well thought out time travel stories I've ever seen, with both the various callbacks between the 80s and the 50s leading to some fun comedic moments, and it's a time travel story that knows to stick to its rules, even once this whole endeavor became a franchise. Internal logic is vital in a story like this, and most of them, even the really good ones, don't have that, or slip up from time to time. Which is one of the many things I think has made Back to the Future hold up after all this time. That and the performances. This is an exceptional cast of characters, delivering the most iconic performance of Michael J. Fox's career, and Doc is still my favorite Christopher Lloyd role. But it's not just them. This is one of those 80s movies where every role is perfectly cast, especially the characters who had to age in the 30-year gap. Great makeup work, by the way. It's got a unique look to it that has been imprinted in pop culture. From the time machine being made out of a crappy car that looks so cool that everyone wanted one, to taking place not in a major city, but a familiar small town that makes it easier to buy that generations of families hang around here for cameos. I don't have the undying blind devotion to the 80s blockbuster that most people my age seem to, but ever since Back to the Future crossed my path in high school, I've loved it dearly. Back to the Future for me is the ultimate popcorn flick. It's not Academy Award worthy, but it's fun, creative, with great performances and a really, really solid script. Not just being a great movie in its own right, but going on to become one of the best film trilogies of all time. Like a lot of others on this list, it's one of those movies I could watch anytime, past, present, or future.
Marty! You've got to come back with me! Where? Back to the future!
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 7. Finding Nemo. Being born in the early 90s, I feel like I grew up as Pixar was developing its name and brand in pop culture. So many of these movies really shaped my childhood, left an impact on my adulthood, and Pixar themselves and learning about their journey made me want to work in animation. Though that never went anywhere. Because of all that, I knew I had to include a Pixar movie on here. They've been so fundamental to me that it felt obvious. What was less obvious was which one to choose. Picking a favorite Pixar movie is notoriously difficult for me. For a while, I had Toy Story 2 in the spot, since I think it's the one I grew to love and knew in different ways as I grew up with it, much like Mary Poppins, and to this day, I will say it's one of the best sequels ever made, but while that is a wonderful movie, there is one Pixar movie that's very special to me. I feel like Finding Nemo is one of those movies that pretty much everyone likes, but as for someone's favorite Pixar movie, and this one might not come up that much compared to Up or Inside Out, but there's such an undeniable charm and a large amount of that classic Pixar heart in Finding Nemo. The underwater world, from the vast ocean to the humble fish tank, feels very well imagined and alive. It's one of those Pixar movies with 100 characters, and you remember and love every single one of them, with appealing design work to make them even more memorable. The once again inspired voice casting. I swear, Pixar is one of the few animation studios in the last 20 years to be able to cast celebrity voice talent that fits perfectly, and just the main heart and journey of the characters. Now yes, the story of going on a harrowing journey to save a loved one is borderline cliche, especially in animation, but as I said before, originality in premise isn't as important as originality in approach. Marlin's not like the typical character who goes on one of these journeys because he's terrified of the outside world and the dangers in it. But through its challenges, surprises, and Marlin's pure persistence to push through the tougher moments in the hopes of seeing his son again are what make it compelling. And Dory might be one of the best comic relief characters in animation, period. Her limitations make her appear to be a thoroughly unhelpful companion for Marlin, but her positive attitude and discovered set of skills turn out to be invaluable to getting Marlin through all this. Dory's struggles are so powerful that it made her able to carry her own movie much later on, and the relationship she forms with Marlin is mutually beneficial in such a sweet way. And it never gets romantic, thank Arceus. Every emotion this movie makes me feel holds up no matter how many times I've seen it. The moment where Marlin and Nemo are finally reunited never ceases to get me choked up out of pure joy. There are certainly more emotional, impactful, and creative movies in Pixar's library, but Finding Nemo to me has a little bit of all of that in a very endearing package. I cannot tell you how many times I've watched this movie with my mom, and we would both be enjoying it as much as we had the first time, and quoting it relentlessly to practically knowing the thing by heart. I think we can all agree, movies that make you react like that are the ones that really stick with you.
I live on this reef, a long, long way from here.
Oh boy, this is gonna be good, I can tell.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number
on
6.
screens.
Young Frankenstein. Yeah, this really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. My love for both Frankenstein and Mel Brooks are very well documented at this point. And both of those kinda started here. They weren't solidified here, but as my love for both grew a few years after I saw this movie, I would watch it much more frequently and appreciate it much more. And even before that, I was always really fond of this movie. It's just so fun and loving. This may be subjective, but I still stand by that this is the best movie Mel Brooks ever made. Looking back on this, from knowing nothing about the material it's parodying to becoming such a Frankenstein, it really works on both levels. For the casual viewer, it's a solid comedy with a memorable cast of characters composed of clever writing and legendary performances, and for the Frankenstein enthusiast, it's a satirical love letter to both the Universal movies and the themes of the original novel. Not only quoting several passages from the text it's based on and using several of the original props from the Karloff movies in the lab, but taking the entire cautionary tale of Frankenstein and turning that on its head into a story of redemption and accepting the challenge to rise above the shadow of legacy rather than trying to dismiss it out of shame. Okay, I might be digging a bit too deep into it, but the fact that I feel like I can find those themes in what is essentially a parody is mind-boggling to me as someone who grew up in a time where pop culture satire and parody was kind of in a dark age. In both the thematic and comedic, the script is genius. There's so many quotes from this movie that I will never, ever, ever get tired of.
Put the candle back.
Said a give?
Evos, my boyfriend!
Nice hopping.
Abby who? Abby normal.
And this is another one of those movies where the history of it is just as interesting as the movie itself, at least to me, with the collaborative effort of Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder making this one of the most well thought out and executed efforts of both of their careers. If I did have to criticize it, I'd say the ending feels a bit abrupt compared to how fleshed out the rest of the movie is, but that's kind of a recurring problem in Mel Brooks' early movies anyway. Young Frankenstein is another one of those movies that I feel I have an interesting and changing relationship with. While it alone didn't make me a hardcore fan of Mel Brooks or Frankenstein, I'd say it planted its seed there. Not to mention, growing up with a movie like this is fascinating as you slowly get more of the jokes every year. I'm sure as time goes on, I'll keep finding more reasons to love it.
Life, do you hear me? Give my creation life!
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 5.
on screens.
City Slickers. Hey look, another well-cast exciting character piece. What are the odds? I'm not quite sure how I'm going to be able to convey why I love this movie so much. Something about it just connected with me, but I'll try my best. For those who don't know, City Slickers is a story of 3 longtime friends who go off on a cattle drive to try and find a new way of viewing life. And that's kinda it. But like the old saying goes, it's not the destination that's captivating, but the journey. City Slickers is a very mellow but deeply memorable journey of a movie. From the actual trials and tribulations that come from the cattle drive, to the calm periods where characters just sit and talk and reflect. It's those moments where they not only get to know each other better, whether they are total strangers or have known each other most of their lives, or learn something new about themselves that really keeps the story flowing and makes the characters relatable. To me, that's really engaging and makes me wonder how I'd have those kind of conversations. Of course, carrying these kind of soul-searching scenes is the cast, with the likes of Daniel Stern, Bruno Kirby, the exceptional Jack Palance in a role that earned him an Academy Award, and the movie that made Billy Crystal one of my all-time favorite actors, and this is still my favorite film of his. It's the perfect blend of well-thought-out writing and splendid performances to bring it to life in a way that feels so personal. It's that feeling I think a lot of us want at some time, to run off with friends to go on a journey to discover something new or something lost, getting away from the busyness and pressure of everyday life to a new and transformative experience. Naturally, that's probably not the feeling I got from this movie when I was watching it obsessively at 12, but I think how well it presents the journey it wants to take this group on is what makes it so enjoyable to watch as much as an exciting blockbuster. At least for me. I even like the much maligned sequel. That's how much I love this movie. City Slickers ignited a lot of my love for movies like this, of not just having life experiences, but examining and talking about them without much judgment or expectation, just living it. There's something really strong about that in a movie, and even though I've seen many movies like it since, nothing quite compares to City Slickers.
Curly said there's nothing like bringing in the herd.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number
on
4.
screens.
Little Shop of Horrors. Hooray, no one's surprised. My love for Little Shop of Horrors is pretty well known at this point. My old review is still one of the most popular videos on my channel. I was going to see it on Broadway before the world shut down, which I'm frankly still not over, even my unboxing of the Funko Pops is more popular than most of my fully produced reviews. I just really love this strange little musical. But I think what caught my attention with Little Shop is that it was such an unusual premise for a musical. I was about 12 when I saw it for the first time, I think. By that point, my musical experience was the fluffy kind by Disney. Then there's Little Shop, which takes place in a dirty back row on the wrong side of town, has a psychotic dentist, domestic abuse, and a vulgar man-eating plant from outer space. That classic wholesome family entertainment. Like many other movies on this list, it wasn't the first or last of its kind, but Little Shop of Horrors presents this tonally dissonant dark musical so masterfully, it almost feels effortless, giving the story heart and teeth at the same time, being true to the B-movie horror films and glitzy musicals that inspired it, while parodying the hell out of them. With the inspired work from Dream Team Alan Menken and Howard Ashman carrying the story into stardom. But the greater miracle of Little Shop of Horrors is that this unusual pitch translated flawlessly to the big screen. Yes, they changed the ending, and a lot of people are still sore about that, but since the movie was my first exposure to the story, I didn't mind, and I still really don't. I get why they did it. But beyond that, this adaptation avoids so many of the pitfalls of its kin. The celebrity casting actually fits the roles perfectly, rather than being a hollow ploy to get butts in seats. Steve Martin as the dentist still unnerves me in a way I can't get enough of, and Rick Moranis not only fits the look of Seymour perfectly, but manages to hold his own during the songs among Broadway caliber singers, which is surprising. Not to mention they had the good sense to let Ellen Greene reprise her role as Audrey, preserving this magnificent performance forever. The tone manages to be balanced out in a way that the whole concept doesn't feel more absurd than it needs to be, being grounded while remembering not to take itself too seriously, something some recent movie musicals should really take note of. And can we please talk about the plant? I thought Wallace and Gromit was impressive to someone who grew up with CGI, but this thing is a work of art in terms of practical effects and puppetry. It blew my mind when I discovered it was a puppet. That it was really in the room all that time and was just as lively as any actor it shared that room with. It's mind-blowing, even today. As the years have gone on, Little Shop of Horrors has become a testament to me that any transition from the stage to the screen can work if you get the right people and make the right choices. It's fun and challenging all at the same time. It's one of the best movie musical adaptations I have ever seen. It's so great. Now please, Hollywood, don't remake it.
I'm just a mean green mother from outer space and I'm bad.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 3. Lilo and Stitch. Again, maybe not much of a surprise. Some of you might have even been waiting for Lilo and Stitch to be somewhere on here. And for good reason. Lilo and Stitch was one of those movies that I forged a deep, meaningful connection to very quickly. But let me gush about the movie itself before we get too personal. For one, it's gorgeous. While a lot of the films of this era in Disney were experimental to a fault and haven't garnered much more than a cult following, I think the thing that's consistent among all of them is the appealing and experimental art styles, and Lilo and Stitch is no exception. From the watercolor backgrounds to the warm setting of Hawaii to the appealing character designs from the creative alien looks, especially with Stitch, who I still say is one of the best designed Disney characters period, to the distinct and unique looks of the people. The voice work is hilarious and heartfelt from the entire cast, and the soundtrack is one of the few in Disney's lineup to pull off using pre-existing tracks in a natural way, along with a very beautiful original score. But the thing that makes this movie stick with me then and now is the story and characters. I was a little older than Lilo when I saw this movie, but at the time, she was one of the most relatable fictional characters to me. A kid with weird or looked down on hobbies who wanted to join in with others but was pushed aside to just be alone most of the time. Going through a difficult time that you don't fully understand the implications of, but your family does, and just wanting a friend to stick by your side no matter what, even if it's an abomination from space. Though for the record, I never punched anyone. The friendship Stitch developed with Lilo was so appealing to me and only made me smile more as Lilo and Stitch evolve into a franchise. Not to mention Stitch's arc is very compelling as well, only truly knowing one way of life and wanting to learn how to be good so he can be loved and accepted. Whenever I hear people talk about this movie, it always feels like they're mostly here for Lilo and Nani and the alien stuff is secondary, but I feel like dismissing the alien side of the story is doing it a great disservice. Both the distance between what the humans and aliens want and the connection between those two worlds through Lilo and Stitch becoming family is what makes the movie work. Showing that no matter what you've been through or where you come from, life can throw unexpected surprises at you that can make things brighter and more exciting again. I found that connection between this little Hawaiian girl and a legal genetic experiment to be one of the most loving and powerful I had seen on screen at the time, and even now. I could keep going, but I might save that for if I ever cover these movies in full like people have been asking. For now, let it be known that Lilo and Stitch hit me personally in a way no other movie really had at the time, in both the struggles and the hopes of future success. That friends and family can come from anywhere. You just have to be willing to open your heart and look.
This is my family. I found it all on my own.
Moving pictures, millions of pixels.
Number 2. The Producers. Now, some of you might be surprised that this movie is this high, some of you might be surprised that this made the list at all, and if you somehow knew me in high school, you might be surprised that this isn't number 1. Because I was obsessed with this movie. I don't know why. When I first saw it, I didn't like it all that much, but then something just clicked, and that was all she wrote for about a year. One of the ways I like to describe why I love The Producers so much is that it's comedy with intent and sincerity. Starting as a vehicle to take down and mock the image of one of history's greatest monsters, a parody that, in my opinion, was polished to perfection by the time the 2005 version came along, and evolving through its transformation into a musical, into a genuinely sweet story about two lost and somewhat corrupt men who found their way thanks to each other. An approach to comedy that is very prominent in Mel Brooks' work as discussed in the Young Frankenstein entry, and I feel only got stronger and more front and center as these stories became emotional and comedically driven musicals. From a musical standpoint, it really shows another of Mel Brooks' many talents, being an accomplished amateur songwriter, with funny, clever, and at some points even heartfelt music and lyrics. These songs are a ton of fun for me to sing along with the energy and creativity that goes into the music, lyrics, staging, and performances. I fell in love with every actor in this movie, for the most part, so much that I've had the good fortune to see most of them on stage in other productions. I thought it was cool that they brought in most of the people who originated these roles on Broadway to play their parts in the movie, and as time has gone on, it's something I deeply appreciate, as it's a way to preserve these great performers' work for people like me who weren't lucky enough to see it on stage. I know a lot of people have issues with this movie because they didn't make the necessary adjustments to the story or performances from the stage to the film version, which I get, I do, but really, I think that's why I love it. It was so different from other movie musicals I had seen, with its bombastic energy and overly theatrical presence. The Producers isn't the best movie musical out there, but it remains my favorite because it ignited my love for so many things. I was obsessed with Mel Brooks after this, watched all of his movies, fell in love with these talented performers, with Nathan Lane in particular becoming one of my all-time favorite actors, all solidifying my love for Broadway and musical theater. I probably wouldn't have seen the shows I did if these people weren't involved in them, and for someone like me, that starts a domino effect of curiosity and devotion. It even brought about fun opportunities later on, being the subject of my first collab video with Wait in the Wings. I owe a lot of things I love and experiences I've had to the 2005 version of The Producers. I know that sounds really weird to a lot of people, but it's a movie I've watched literally dozens of times, and I will gladly sit down and watch it again.
It's just no go, you've got no show without the Producers.
But now, before we get to number 1, let's look at some quick honorable mentions. The Imitation Game almost made the list, and probably would have if I hadn't considered An Adventure in Space and Time, but after a couple of rewatches when this movie came to Netflix last year, I got way more attached to it. The story is fascinating in its historical context and tragic in its more personal moments. I think it's the best movie Benedict Cumberbatch has made so far. I love the guy, but it tends to be a coin toss with his movie projects. But this one was definitely a winner in my eyes. Arsenic and Old Lace. Now, I'm willing to bet most of you have never heard of this one before, but it is by far my favorite dark comedy. I don't want to say too much about the story, since I think it's a lot more absurd to go in blind, but the suspense and bizarreness are on another level in this cult classic. It just keeps building on itself, and it is so much fun in its absurdity and genuine suspense. With Halloween coming up, if you can find it, give it a watch. It's insane. And I love it. The Nightmare Before Christmas. I was really late to the party on this one because I thought it looked too scary as a kid, but once I finally gave in and watched it a few years ago, The Nightmare Before Christmas is creepy looking, but it's so innocent in its execution, with a charming original premise and a grim, colorful cast of characters. I also like that it's an animated movie, with most of its story being told through song like a mega musical. I really wish there were more like that. I look forward to seeing this movie dominate my Hot Topic every year for Halloween and Christmas, because it's a movie for both holidays. It can be both. Arrival. I've only managed to see this movie once. That is the only reason it is in the honorable mentions. Arrival kind of blew me away with how unique it was approaching the alien landing story. I hesitate to say invasion because that's not really what it's about. It's all about language and communication and knowledge and what we do with that knowledge. It's the kind of deep introspective stuff that makes science fiction as great a genre as it is. The alien designs are unbelievably creative and the acting is astounding. And to join the 2017 crowd, Amy Adams, for the Oscar nod, robbed. Come on, guys. Hamilton. They advertise as a film, it counts. Not only is there the potential for this to encourage a wider accessibility for musical theater in general, which, please, dear God, please, but Hamilton is one of those productions that's so good it makes me mad. The music is inspired and innovating, the performances are exceptional, and even if you have to take its historical presentation with a grain of salt, like every other biopic that's ever existed, if a story like this can reignite interest in its subject respectively, I feel it's done its job successfully. I'm gonna be honest, guys, if this came out a year or two ago, it might have made the list proper. More like this, please. Witness for the Prosecution. My mom was really mad when I didn't put this on the list, so here it is in the honorable mentions. But it's a great classic court drama film, and I can't say much more than that. It's one of those movies where the less you know going in, the better. And now, we have arrived.
More than any one star, truly.
My number 1 favorite movie of all time is... I tend to feel a lot of pressure when asked what my favorite movie is because I love so many of them. So to figure out what my number 1 was, I decided to see which movie encompassed everything we talked about so far. Something that I have seen an unbearable amount of times, that means something to me on a deep personal level, enhanced my appreciation for filmmaking, and it's just a great movie on its own. Taking all that into account, I realized there was only one answer. The Lion King. I love this movie. It is beautiful and wonderful on every level I can think of, and I struggle to find fault with it, which is why it's weird that I'm kind of at a loss for words here now that I've reached the number 1 spot. Mostly because I already poured my heart out about this movie last year during my look back at the Lion King special, but for those of you who don't have half an hour to spare to hear me gush about what I consider one of Disney's masterpieces, or you just want a refresher after waiting to see what my number 1 movie would be, here's the Cliff Notes version, using the 3 major aspects I talked about earlier. From a respecting the art and work of filmmaking perspective, hearing about the process of making The Lion King is frustrating and inspirational all at the same time. The work and dedication that went into this movie from these very talented and dedicated people pouring and pushing their talents into making the story the best it can be, despite no one having faith in this project outside of that team. Drawing inspiration from several moving and powerful powerful stories to tell one all their own that could stand next to the best in Disney's catalog without being another fairy tale, pushing expectations both behind the scenes and on the screen. From the viewpoint of it just being a great movie, every area of the production is polished and invokes such wonder and sheer epicness. The animation is smooth, the techniques to pull certain scenes off were quite innovative and executed well, the style is beautiful in every sense of the word, the music is some of the most unique and memorable from Disney animation, the voice cast is stellar, and the story is incredibly compelling. It's one of those stories that can take you on every emotional journey you can in a movie, from the silly to the somber, from the loving to the despicable, all with a varied cast of endearing and fleshed out characters. And on a personal level, I feel like this was the movie that made me love Disney, because until this point, Disney wasn't really my thing outside of a couple of TV shows. The only movies I vaguely remember liking as a little kid were Mary Poppins and 101 Dalmatians. But after being blown away by this grand and emotional journey that I saw in The Lion King, I slowly but surely saw much more from them. Realizing the heights these movies could reach certainly made me more of a Disney fan. But The Lion King is also special in that it got me through what was the most difficult year in my life. Realizing much later on that the message that everyone has an essential role to fill in the world and that things can get better after life-changing obstacles was something that I think I really needed to know at the time, even if I couldn't quite put it into words. This wasn't long before I got into Lilo Stitch, in case anyone was curious. It's beautiful, entertaining, and inspirational, making The Lion King my all-time favorite movie.
You are my son, and the one true king.
And there you have it. I really hope you guys enjoyed me rambling on about these movies. I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate keeping all this going for 5 years. A lot can happen in 5 years. Life can throw you difficult challenges, and things might not move in the direction you want them to. But new opportunities can be discovered, achievements can be reached, and fun, meaningful connections can be made. Things I hope to have one day when I started this channel, and I am deeply, deeply grateful to say that I do. There's still a lot more to do, more things to talk about, and hopefully more opportunities to discover. But that's what the next 5 years are for. For growth. For change. Starting now. Oh yeah, that's much better. Anyway, do you agree with my list? What are some of your favorite movies, and more importantly, why are they your favorites? Let me know in the comments below. After all, that's why the series is called Let's Talk About. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay safe, take care of yourselves. I'm Kate Cast, and I will see you guys next time.